A quick warning, folks. We'll be discussing the life of a person who had to deal with a lot of tragedy. That means we're going to be discussing the death of infants, divorce, drug use, and other sensitive topics. If any of this is something that's going to bother you, consider skipping this video. Please take care of yourself and stay safe. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Garvin, and I read books and natter about things on the internet. So, this video is going to be a quick and dirty introduction to the man of the month, Philip K. Dick, the writer of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, aka Blade Runner. We can remember it for you wholesale, aka Total Recall, The Man in the High Castle, and what we'll be reviewing this month, Minority Report, as well as many other novels and short stories. Now, for several years in my written series, there's a link in the description, I've spent February comparing a Philip K. Dick written story to the movies and other media that were based on it. Because a lot of his stories have been adapted into movies and other forms of entertainment with varying levels of fidelity. Not to mention, a lot of the ideas that he puts in his stories find themselves in other works. Now, this is going to be a short video because I'm not going to do a deep dive. I'm just going to touch on the major events of his life. For more information, please check out the written biography I did for him, or look up some of the books written about his life, or even some of the video documentaries. Thank you. Sadly, one of the pivotal moments in Philip's life occurred before he was even 2 months old. Philip was born with a twin. Her name was Jane Charlotte, and she didn't make it to her second month. This is because Philip's mother, for a lot of background reasons, wasn't able to produce enough milk for both of her children. It was the 1920s. Medical technology was not at the level it is now, so no one realized that Jane Charlotte was basically starving until it was too late. This tragedy shattered Philip's family apart. His father would blame his mother and divorce her before Philip was even 4 years old. His mother would take Philip and raise him alone in Berkeley, California. And this event would loom like a shadow over Philip's relationship with his mother, and loom like a shadow over him. He would be haunted by a sense of guilt for being the twin that survived. We'll see later he even would admit to having visions of her as an adult. And these are experiences that bleed into his writing, and I'll discuss that more in the next video. This would also affect his relationships with other women. Philip would be married 5 times in his life. His shortest marriage lasted less than a year, and his longest marriage lasted about 8. Philip would also be constantly drawn to younger women, usually brunettes, and seemed to idolize the state of marriage, but wasn't really interested in the practice of marriage, if you catch my drift. For Philip, whenever he was single, he would channel a lot of energy into finding a wife. But when he was married, he would come to loathe his relationship and spend a lot of energy trying to escape that marriage. My view on this is he was desperately hunting for happiness, but had no damn idea what would actually make him happy, which is sadly a common trait in humanity. This also shows up in his writing, but again, next week. Philip was a college dropout, and his greatest dream, perhaps ironically, was to be a mainstream literary author, not a science fiction author. Literary success eluded him completely. All of his non science fiction novels were soundly rejected by publishers. He only started writing science fiction when encouraged by Anthony Boucher, then editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Mr. Butcher was teaching a creative writing class that Philip's mother was taking, and he saw something in Philip's work. Philip would sell his first short story for $75. To give you an idea of how much that was, his mortgage on the house he had at the time was $27.50. $27.50? I'm sorry, I can't rent the damn decent sized post office box for that much. And this guy was getting a house for less in California for less money than I've spent on a meal of sushi? What is this bull? Right, right. I apologize, folks. Sorry. Philip K. Dick would never become a mainstream author, but his works would become very influential on new wave science fiction, which I talk more about on my discussion on where cyberpunk comes from. That's a written work that I'll leave a link to. If you'd like me to make a video discussing that, please leave a comment below or feel free to just like this video. But by the time the 1960s rolled around, he was an established science fiction author and began to experiment with drug use, which also impacted his writing. It certainly influenced books like A Scanner Darkly, which, by his own admission, pulled from events and experiences in his life at the time to use in the story. After a failed suicide attempt, Philip abandoned his drug use and sought to make peace with himself. A chance encounter in 1974 with a young lady wearing a Christian fish necklace caused a new period in his life. The light bouncing off that necklace caused him to have a vision. Now, to be clear, he had episodes like this before. Throughout his life, he was convinced that his twin, Jane Charlotte, was attempting to contact him, for example. But this period is where the visions become the most intense and consistent, at least according to Mr. Dick here. He would honestly come to the conclusion that he was experiencing divine visitations. And this would become a theme in his later works, including his last novel, which was published after his death of a stroke in 1982. Philip K. Dick would die, leaving behind 44 completed novels, 120 short stories, two daughters, and a son, all of whom spoke well of him as a loving, if inconsistent, father. To be honest, there are much worse legacies to leave behind. Now, this video was not meant to be an exhaustive biography, nor is the written work I'll be linking to below, but it should give you an idea of the kind of life and strain that produced the works that we're looking at. Next week, I'll talk more about the themes and ideas that Philip K. Dick grappled with in those works. After that, we'll look at Minority Report, and my patrons get a special podcast where I and a patron discuss the differences between the movie and the written work, along with the digression into what port is. You can join us and get access for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of patrons, special thank you to Big Steve, who remains my biggest supporter. Thanks, buddy. We could not do this without you. I hope all of you join me next week. But until then, please take care of yourselves, each other, and of course, keep reading.